Inaya Rahman parked behind the sheriff's rig, an oversized SUV with a massive push bar up front and a shiny Starling County decal on the hood. The cars parked across the street had left a gap behind the mobile lab and ambulance. The sirens were quiet. The rack lights turned off, a hush around the perimeter where the police were setting up a cordon. She slid out of her car neatly, her Denver police badge conspicuous on the waistband of her slacks. As a detective, she was not in uniform, dressed formally in a sharp blue blazer and a button-to-the-throat white blouse. She had to be. She was forcing her way into an insular group, as wary of the sheriff's reputation as the sheriff would be of hers. The Community Response Unit of the DPD was about as popular with law enforcement here as police oversight had been in Chicago, her former placement. The CRU was small, floated outside the existing police structure, and could be assigned to any case that called for police accountability. In the aftermath of national protests against police brutality, the thinking behind CRU was to offer complete transparency to over-policed communities, and to bring in new investigators where complaints had been filed against an officer whose conduct was under review. Inaya's presence would inform the sheriff he was about to be removed because of a backlog of complaints against his substation. The complaints weren't just about excessive force by Blackwater deputies. They also encompassed sustained harassment of minorities that the sheriff had refused to respond to. He'd object to being taken off the case, and he'd probably resist. She wouldn't let that stop her. She was ready to do her job and eager to get back to real police work. For the past few months, she'd been working on community outreach, visiting expos and fairs, talking to students and local council members to get a feel for how effectively the police were serving the public. It was important, trust-building work, but it wasn't what she had trained for. It was what she'd had to accept. Maybe she'd needed the change. Events at her past placement had led to the collapse of a case of national importance, followed by a very public breakdown. The fallout had caused her to flee to Denver, but now she was growing impatient with the downgrading of her duties, eager to put her skills to use. Enough of being condescended to. Enough of being overlooked. She straightened a seam on her blouse, her shoulders back, her chin raised. She couldn't undo past mistakes. She could only use what she'd learned to move forward. This was a new city, a new job, a chance for her to start again. As she neared the building, her steps faltered in her court shoes. A tent screened the front of the two-story building from view, a house with narrow dormers, its porch in need of repair. Inaya knew this house. It was a local mosque that served the Muslim community in Blackwater Falls, Castle Pines, and several of the smaller mountain towns. A crowd was beginning to gather on the sidewalk. She acknowledged a few of the women she knew before moving past them. A muscle-bound patrol officer was guarding the entrance to the tent. His bulk made him perfect for the job. He shifted to block her entry despite the fact that he could see her badge. "And who might you be?" He made the most of his limited authority, his arms crossed over his chest. She ignored his attempt to discourage her, showing him her ID. "Detective Inaya Rahman, CRU. I was called to the scene." His ID was obscured, or she'd have used his name to emphasize his lack of courtesy. He scowled down at her, crowding her a little. "I'm not sure the sheriff would feel the need to call you." He was right, but she wasn't going to tell him she was here to take over. Instead, she countered, "I'm not sure why you're standing in my space." She did know why, of course. She was young, female, and dark-skinned, a newcomer or an outsider, depending on how he saw her. He'd rely on that, boxing her in, and ignore the fact she outstripped him in rank if she gave him any leeway. "If you're in any doubt, please call the sheriff, or you can check with Lieutenant Seif, the head of community response. He knows Sheriff Grant." "I'll wait while you confirm his orders."